Hey there, this is Christopher Stacer, and I have the honor of interviewing the writing team of Cheryl Dubois and Debra Pawlak. Do I have that right on the pronunciations?
Debra Ann.
Debra Ann. And they are the authors of the Secret Heroine Trilogy. And they started with Soldier Spy Heroine and published last year The Revolution, which is part one of a series. And I think it's really fun to kind of look back at the original Fanny Campbell book from the 19th century. And I guess that you drew a lot of inspiration for Fanny Campbell for writing your book. Is that right?
Yeah, Fanny Campbell was the inspiration for Sarah Emma Edmonds, who was the heroine in our first book during the Civil War. And she inspired Fanny, or Fanny inspired her to dress like a man and serve in the Union Army. And now the second book featured Fanny and her adventures at sea, dressed as a pirate.
Well, the original book was a bestseller in the 1840s. So we took the original book and we embellished it and rewrote it in modern English.
Including a lot more history.
It was very hard to read the original copy of it. So,
and she was the first literary heroine where a woman actually took charge of something. So she was a big hit with the ladies.
I can imagine.
I'm sure she inspired a lot of women.
She did.
Around the world.
She did.
And it's set in New England, correct?
Mostly, but a lot of it takes place in the Caribbean, with pirates and privateers. And, one of the main things that we talk about in the book is the difference between them, because you think of pirates as being vicious killers, but during the Revolutionary War, the British considered anybody that was taking British ships to be pirates, but they were actually licensed privateers with letters of marque from the Continental Congress to go out and steal ships, basically, and their cargo, and bring them back for the Continental Army to help Washington win the war.
Fascinating.
And if they hadn't had the privateers, they probably wouldn't have won the war, because I'll give you some statistics. For instance, there were 1,697 privateer vessels. There were only 64 naval vessels. It was the Revolutionary War is what started the U.S. Navy. They started with one ship, which was called the Hannah. And the enemy ships, they actually captured 196 enemy ships. The naval ships and the privateers captured 2,233. So that's a big difference. That's almost 4 times the number.
Way more.
Yeah. So it's pretty amazing how much they did. Yeah, it's way more than 4.
That's what makes it historical fiction so fascinating, is like just to see the research that's involved that went into your book. It's incredible.
It's an enormous amount of research. Yes. We even went up there and we went all over to the different museums, found furnishings and other things that we couldn't find anywhere else.
And we visited the wharf in Marblehead where the Hannah was docked. And that's kind of considered the birthplace of the American Navy.
You mean in Beverly?
Beverly.
The man that owned the Hannah owned the dock there,
right?
John Glover, who plays a big part in our books, because he was a brigadier general under Washington and saved Washington 3 times, actually, and that's in our book. That's in the 3rd book.
My word! Wow.
Revolution 2. And but the real inspiration, the person that really inspired everything, was Moll Pitcher.
Yes.
Lynn, the famous psychic of Lynn. She was known world round. I'm going to let Debbie explain a little bit about her. And how she did.
And she was an actual historical figure.
Yes. Yeah, she was a real person. Yeah, she was known all over the world, and people came from everywhere to get readings with her. She lived in Lynn, Massachusetts. She was born in Marblehead. And when she was a child, she moved to Lynn. And she married a man that was a shoemaker. And in order to make ends meet, she did readings and she sold potions and herbs and things like that. Her grandfather was known as the Wizard of Marblehead, and he was, they called him the Wizard because he used to go up behind his house on Old Burial Hill during storms, and he'd call out to the sailors, and they swore they could hear him, and he'd guide them to safety. So a lot of the sailors back then consulted him before they even went to sea, and they did with Maul Pitcher as well.
But the real kick with Maul is that the British came to her also, both the soldiers and the sailors, mostly generals would come to say, I have orders to attack Bunker Hill or Cambridge or Lexington, not Cambridge, Concord or Lexington next week. Am I going to survive and am I going to go down in history? And of course, she'd see that they die, but she would just say, yes, you're going to go down in history. But then she'd run that information to Glover or Washington, or she became friends with Martha, actually.
Yeah, she
Wow.
And so she was spying that way.
And she worked with the Sons of Liberty, so she often gave messages to them as well, whatever the British soldiers told her. And they never suspected that she was relaying information to the colonial army. They never expected it.
So they thought she was a loyalist all that time, when in fact she was working for the other side and running this information. But she would also hide munitions in the woods, in these wolf pits, because they would come in privateer ships and they'd need to put the guns somewhere until they needed them. So she would hide them and then hang a red tablecloth when she was ready for them to be picked up. Or somebody would get a message to her and say, okay, now we're ready for it. And they'd have to go to the woods and pull them out of these pits. So she did a lot of amazing things at her own risk and her family's risk.
Sure.
To assist the Sons of Liberty and the colonial army.
You actually were attempting to find the table that she used for her readings?
Yes, and we found it in the
Jeremiah Lee
Museum. And we had gone back and forth between museums because everybody kept saying, no, it's here, no, it's there. Nobody knew where it was. We found it for them. They weren't even aware they had it. It was behind a door. We had walked into that room before, and I kept saying, I think it's in here, but there's nothing in here. It was an empty room. And then the second time we went in, I pulled the door open, and there was the table folded up in the corner. And I begged them to sell it to me, but they wouldn't, even though they didn't know they had it.
But they did let us take some pictures.
Yeah, we did get photos of it. So, but
yeah,
Maul really inspired Fanny to do this, and Fanny inspired so many women. This whole series is extremely inspirational for young women or grown women, and even senior women to get out and do what they believe in and what they really truly want to do.
Right, and this is called the Secret Heroine Trilogy.
Yes,
and
it was optioned for a mini series, and then events took place called COVID, and things it didn't get made, but we're working on a new option now.
Oh, fantastic!
Right, for a TV series.
And the first book in the series, Soldier, Spy, Heroine, that book has now been published for a few years. Is that right?
Yeah, that was published 5 years ago.
Yeah, that was our first book. Yes.
And this will be the third, the second publication.
Yeah.
And the great thing is, it's great for men too, because it recounts the start of the U.S. Navy, and again, who doesn't like pirates? In fact, we wanted to talk a little bit about the Articles of Agreement that the pirates had, because they were pretty diplomatic. In fact, more diplomatic than the Navy or merchant ships. Merchant ships actually would take men and force them into labor for years at a time. Whereas, but they did the same thing on the pirate ship, but everybody had a boat.
Yeah. Amongst themselves, they were their own little democracy.
Okay.
They were democratic.
Very interesting.
Everyone was treated fairly as far as the shipmates go. And
Mhm.
depending on your level of seniority or your level, whether you were an officer or not, or a captain, you got different benefits, and it was all written down and agreed upon.
How many pieces of 8 they'd get if you,
Mhm.
and also if you'd lose a limb, if you lost an arm, you get X number of pieces of 8. If you lost a leg, it was worth more. If you lost an eye, it was really interesting how they divvied it up. But they voted their captain in, and they could vote him out if they decided they didn't want him to be captain anymore.
Wow. Yeah,
But
it sounds like a work co-op almost.
yes, it was. It was a
It
working
was.
co-op, is
It
what it
was.
was. And then they divvy everything up. But the interesting thing is, you would think that they were ruthless and they would rape and pillage women, but they would not allow anyone to harm a woman.
No.
They wouldn't allow them on board either. Although we make a sort of a
One exception.
on the
In the Fanny
first
Campbell book, yes, there's one exception.
because they needed to get her to safety because she was the only woman on the ship they took. And one of our guys steps up, who's now got some clout on the boat, and says, please let us take her to a safe port. She becomes a main character in the book.
Mhm.
So it actually kind of worked out that they found her. Yeah. Her name is Marion. One of the ships gets named after her. So, but what else did they do that they, if they deserted the ship, they were SOL. I mean, they would just maroon them on an island with a pistol, 1 bullet, and a bottle of water or a bottle of rum. And that's pretty much it.
Well, what I enjoyed about the first book is just how vivid the life was, the daily life for the characters at the start of the revolution. It's just so fun to put your imagination into that time and to see all the human stories.
And there are a lot of things about the Revolutionary War that kind of gotten forgotten. People don't really remember. And
how brave these people were and how they put their life on the line. And the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which is in the 3rd book, basically those men that signed threw their lives away because every single one of them, they either went to jail, they were
labeled traitors by the British.
They lost
everything. They were hung.
So it was, and that's going to be in the back index of our book, how people suffered basically from supporting a cause that they believed in. And we wouldn't be America today. You're talking, a lot of people are talking about taking down Washington statues, but we wouldn't be America today if Washington hadn't led the army through the entire battle. So
absolutely.
And they say that we didn't win the battle against the British. Washington outspied them. Yeah. So he had spies all over, and Mull was one of them.
Oh, wow.
Of course, there's no record in history that she was a spy, but there was a lot of records that she actually did readings for these generals, but nobody writes down that they are spies.
No paper trail when you're a spy.
Right. And that's the thing, is she could infiltrate the enemy through the readings.
Exactly, because
they didn't expect a woman to turn around and tell on them either. They kind of looked down on women as being stupid. So they figured they could say anything to her, it wouldn't matter.
Yep. And I think that's the whole inspiration of this series are women in history who had a massive impact in unexpected ways.
And should have been in our history books, but weren't. So we're trying to give them their due.
Yep.
There were over 500 women in the Civil War that dressed as men and went to battle. Some went because they wanted to be with their husbands, but others went because they wanted to make a difference.
They wanted to fight.
And then the same with the Revolutionary War, but there's less records of how many women that they discovered were actually fighting.
That's truly unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well,
I wouldn't have had the guts.
It's such an honor to have a conversation with you both.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely. So you can go to a place in time and currently pick up The Revolution, and the next Revolution 2 will be available December
hopefully we're shooting, we just finished it yesterday.
Oh my
October
gosh,
1st, we
congratulations.
finished the book. We're doing the editing now, the cleanup. So we're gonna have it ready, we hope, before the end of November. So
Yeah,
it'll be
that's
ready for
what we're-
Christmas.
that's what
Excellent. It'll be
we're-
ready for Christmas. Fantastic.
And the publisher is aplaceandtime.press. And you can buy it there, signed copy, 2 books for a discounted price if you buy both. And or you can get it on any
Yeah, Amazon.
site
Yeah.
where you buy a book.
Yeah.